In the frozen December of 1916, the streets of Petrograd were cloaked in snow. Russia was bleeding on the battlefields of the First World War. Hunger and unrest gripped the cities, and whispers of revolution echoed through taverns, barracks, and factories. Inside the gilded halls of the empire, however, another crisis consumed the aristocracy. A man of humble Siberian birth, clad in a simple black robe, had risen to a position of almost unthinkable influence at the very heart of the Romanov dynasty. His name was Grigori Rasputin. To some, he was a miracle worker sent by God to protect the imperial heir. To others, he was a sinister fraud, a seducer, a corrupting influence whose presence was poisoning Russia itself. The story of Rasputin's poisoning and assassination is among the most famous in modern history. It is a tale drenched in rumor, myth, and contradiction. Poisoned cakes, poisoned wine, bullets, and icy water. A man who would not die. But behind the legend lies the true context of an empire on the brink, a desperate attempt by nobles to save a monarchy already collapsing under its own weight. To understand how Rasputin met his strange and violent end, we must first return to his unlikely beginnings in the windswept plains of Siberia and trace the path that brought him to the candlelit salons of St. Petersburg. Rasputin was born in January 1869 in the village of Pokrovskoye in the Tobolsk province of western Siberia. This was not the Russia of onion-domed palaces or marble avenues, but a remote, harsh land of forests, rivers, and endless winter. His family were peasants living in a one-room log hut. His father, Efim, worked as a courier for the local monastery, while his mother, Anna, tended to the home. The young Grigori was illiterate, unruly, and restless. Villagers remembered him as mischievous, often thieving or fighting, but also strangely gifted. He would sometimes fall into trances or claim to see visions. These early glimpses of mysticism would later define his reputation. As a teenager, Rasputin married Praskovya Dubrovina, a farmer's daughter. Together they had several children, though only a few survived into adulthood. Unlike many men of his village, Rasputin did not settle quietly into peasant life. He wandered restless, drawn to religious pilgrimage. In the 1890s, he made his way to the monastery of Verkhoturia. There, he claimed to have undergone a profound spiritual awakening. Though he never took holy orders, he embraced the life of a starets, a wandering holy man, part mystic, part preacher, part healer. By the turn of the 20th century, Rasputin's reputation as a man of unusual spiritual power had spread. He was said to heal the sick, to calm the troubled, and to possess second sight. His piercing eyes and intense prayers made a deep impression on those who met him. Around 1903, he traveled to St. Petersburg, the glittering capital of the Russian Empire. Here, aristocrats were hungry for spiritual renewal. Many, disillusioned by the corruption of the Orthodox Church hierarchy, sought guidance in mystics and visionaries. Rasputin, with his peasant authenticity and aura of raw spirituality, fascinated them. It was through these circles that Rasputin's path intersected with the most powerful family in Russia, the Romanovs. Nicholas II, the last Tsar, and his wife Alexandra were deeply religious. Yet their piety was not enough to shield them from personal tragedy. Their long-awaited son, Alexei, born in 1904, was stricken with hemophilia, a life-threatening disease inherited through Alexandra's bloodline from Queen Victoria. Every fall, every bruise, carried the risk of uncontrolled bleeding. Doctors were powerless. The boy's life was a constant shadow of fear. When Rasputin was introduced to the imperial couple in 1905, he was at first just one more holy man in a city full of mystics. But when Alexei suffered a particularly severe hemorrhage in 1907, it was Rasputin's prayers that seemed to calm the boy and stem the bleeding. Whether coincidence, the placebo effect, or genuine influence, Alexandra was convinced that Rasputin had saved her son's life. From that moment, Rasputin became indispensable. Alexandra regarded him as a man sent by God. Nicholas, devoted to his wife, tolerated Rasputin's growing presence at court. And so, a Siberian peasant, illiterate until adulthood, rough in manner, simple in speech, entered the innermost circle of the Russian monarchy. The more Rasputin appeared at court, the more scandalous his reputation became. He openly drank, womanized, and boasted of his closeness to the royal family. Rumors spread that he seduced aristocratic women under the guise of spiritual healing. Caricatures in the press depicted him as a devil with hypnotic eyes, a lecherous monk corrupting the empress. Yet Alexandra remained steadfast. She believed he was a holy man, misunderstood and maligned by jealous courtiers. And when Nicholas took personal command of Russia's army during the First World War, leaving Alexandra effectively in charge, Rasputin's influence only grew. Ministers were appointed or dismissed at his word. Policies were rumored to pass through his advice. In the eyes of many Russians, Rasputin was now the hidden power behind the throne. This perception, whether true or exaggerated, made him a lightning rod for anger. Soldiers dying at the front, workers striking in Petrograd, nobles frustrated with the Tsarina, all saw Rasputin as the poisonous root of the empire's decay. By late 1916, as Russia's war effort collapsed and revolution loomed, a group of aristocrats decided that the only way to save the monarchy was to eliminate Rasputin himself. By the winter of 1916, Russia was a nation unraveling. The First World War had dragged on for over 2 years, and its toll was catastrophic. Millions of men had been conscripted, and millions more had perished on the front lines. Russian industry, ill-prepared for modern mechanized war, could not keep up with the demand for weapons, boots, or even bread. In the cities, queues stretched for blocks, as women waited for hours in the cold for a few loaves of black bread. Soldiers returning on leave found their families starving. Strikes erupted across Petrograd and Moscow, and in the trenches, morale was collapsing under the weight of endless defeats at the hands of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Nicholas II, a man of personal devotion but poor political judgment, had taken the unprecedented step of assuming direct command of the Russian armies in 1915. This decision left the government in Petrograd effectively in the hands of his wife, Alexandra. She, in turn, relied on the advice and prayers of Rasputin. For the nobility and political elite, this was intolerable. A peasant mystic, dirty, uncouth, rumored to be a drunkard and libertine, was seen as controlling the empress, meddling in ministerial appointments, and perhaps even sabotaging Russia's war effort. Whispers swirled that Rasputin was a German agent, working through Alexandra, herself of German descent, to bring about Russia's defeat. Whether or not these rumors had truth, their impact was undeniable. Rasputin had become the face of corruption, weakness, and treachery. His removal, many believed, was the only hope for saving the monarchy. At the heart of the conspiracy stood Prince Felix Yusupov. Born in 1887, he was the youngest son of the immensely wealthy Yusupov family, whose fortune dwarfed that of even many Romanovs. Their palaces were filled with treasures, jewels, paintings, and antiques collected over centuries. Felix was eccentric and flamboyant. As a young man, he had a reputation for dressing in women's clothes, hosting elaborate parties, and pursuing the pleasures of high society. He studied at Oxford University, where his extravagance and charm made him a well-known figure. In 1914, he married Princess Irina Alexandrovna, a niece of Tsar Nicholas II. Their union placed him at the very heart of the Romanov circle. But Felix was restless, and as war ravaged Russia, he saw in Rasputin not only a national danger, but a personal affront to the dignity of the aristocracy. It was Yusupov who first conceived the idea of luring Rasputin to his palace on the Moika River. He imagined the murder as a grand gesture, both patriotic and heroic, that would restore honor to the monarchy. Felix's most powerful ally was Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. Born in 1891, Dmitri was a grandson of Tsar Alexander II and cousin to Nicholas II. Handsome, athletic, and dignified, he was among the most prominent Romanov princes of his generation. Orphaned young, Dmitri was raised under the care of the imperial family. He served with distinction in the cavalry during the First World War, but his aristocratic pride left him deeply hostile to Rasputin. To Dmitri, the holy man's presence at court was a stain on the dignity of the dynasty. By joining the conspiracy, Dmitri provided not only moral weight, but dynastic legitimacy. His involvement would later shield Yusupov from harsher punishment, though it would also destroy Dmitri's place within the Romanov family. The third pillar of the plot was Vladimir Purishkevich, a member of the Duma, Russia's parliament. Born in 1870, Purishkevich was a man of extremes, a monarchist to the core, a fierce nationalist, and a powerful orator. He was notorious for his fiery speeches, filled with passion and invective. In November 1916, only weeks before Rasputin's death, Purishkevich had delivered a thunderous address denouncing the influence of dark forces at the heart of government. Everyone knew whom he meant, Rasputin and Alexandra. By including Purishkevich, the conspiracy extended beyond palace intrigue into the political sphere. His voice gave the assassination a veneer of patriotic duty, a desperate act to save Russia itself. Supporting the core trio were two lesser figures. Dr. Stanislav Lazovert, a military physician, was tasked with providing the poison, cyanide, supposedly potent enough to kill a man instantly. He would later claim to have supplied a deadly dose, though skeptics doubt whether the poison was ever actually used. Lieutenant Sergei Sukhotin, an officer and friend of Yusupov, played a minor but practical role in the plan. His duty was to help restrain Rasputin and dispose of the body once the deed was done. The scheme was deceptively simple. Rasputin would be lured to the Yusupov palace late at night under the pretense of meeting Princess Irina. He would be escorted to a cellar room decorated to resemble a private sitting room. There, cakes and wine laced with cyanide awaited. The conspirators believed Rasputin would eat and drink, collapse quickly, and die without struggle. His body would then be carried out under cover of darkness and disposed of in the frozen Neva River. It was meant to be quick, clean, and decisive. A surgical strike to remove a cancer from Russia's body politic. But history rarely follows such neat designs. As December 1916 approached, tension gripped Petrograd. Rumors of assassination swirled through salons and taverns alike. Rasputin himself, though outwardly confident, seemed to sense danger. In letters to Nicholas and Alexandra, he warned of dark forces plotting his death, and ominously predicted that if he were killed by commoners, the dynasty would endure. But if killed by noble hands, the Romanovs would not survive 2 years. Whether prophecy or coincidence, his words would prove chillingly accurate. The stage for one of history's most infamous assassinations was the lavish Yusupov Palace, located on the banks of the Moika River in Petrograd. Built in the 18th century, it was a grand residence of gilded halls, marble staircases, and opulent salons. Its rooms had once hosted emperors, foreign dignitaries, and glittering balls. But on this cold December night, the palace would host something darker, a murder cloaked in secrecy. Prince Felix Yusupov, nervous but determined, had prepared a basement room for Rasputin. This chamber was not a dungeon, but a cozy, decorated salon, adorned with rugs, chairs, and a low table. On it, cakes and bottles of Madeira wine had been carefully arranged. According to later testimony, each cake and each glass had been laced with cyanide, supposedly enough to kill several men. Upstairs, Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and Vladimir Purishkevich waited anxiously, while Dr. Lazovert and Lieutenant Sukhotin lingered nearby, ready to assist. Yusupov's wife, Princess Irina, the bait for the trap, was not present at all. She had been sent to Crimea. Rasputin would never meet her that night. Shortly before midnight, Rasputin arrived at the palace. The streets outside were hushed, the snow crunching under his boots. He wore his usual black peasant-style robe, topped with a heavy fur coat. He was in good spirits, greeting Yusupov warmly. The prince led him down into the basement chamber. Rasputin sat relaxed, while Yusupov played the attentive host. They chatted casually, about music, about society gossip, about the war. Rasputin seemed at ease, completely unsuspecting. Yusupov offered him the cakes and wine. Rasputin began to eat, washing them down with glass after glass of Madeira. Minutes passed, then an hour, yet nothing happened. The conspirators had counted on the cyanide to finish Rasputin quickly, but to their horror, he seemed utterly unaffected. He laughed, told stories, and even began to sing snatches of folk songs. Yusupov, growing pale, excused himself and hurried upstairs to report. The others were incredulous. How could Rasputin still be alive? Had Lazovert botched the poison? Had Rasputin's iron constitution resisted it? Later theories suggested the cake's sugar might have neutralized the cyanide, or that the doctor had intentionally substituted harmless powder to avoid committing murder. Whatever the truth, Rasputin remained very much alive. Back downstairs, Yusupov grew increasingly desperate. Rasputin strummed a guitar, singing softly, his piercing eyes fixed on the prince. Yusupov would later recall being mesmerized, even repulsed, by Rasputin's uncanny presence. At last, unable to wait any longer, Yusupov acted. At around 2:30 in the morning, Yusupov retrieved a revolver. He stepped behind Rasputin and fired at close range, the bullet striking his chest. Rasputin collapsed onto the carpet, gasping. Yusupov dropped the gun, shaken, and bent over the body. Rasputin's breathing grew shallow, then stopped. Relieved, Yusupov hurried upstairs. "It's done," he whispered. The conspirators congratulated one another. At last, the mad monk was dead. Or so they thought. After a short time, Yusupov, restless, returned to the basement to look once more upon the corpse. As he bent over, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. With a guttural cry, he lunged upward, clutching at Yusupov's shoulders. Terrified, Yusupov tore himself free as Rasputin staggered to his feet. Blood poured from his wound, yet he lurched toward the stairs, muttering, "Felix, Felix, I will tell the Tsarina everything." He clawed his way upward, burst through the door, and stumbled into the snowy courtyard. The conspirators upstairs froze in shock as they heard the door slam and Rasputin's boots crunching on the ice. Purishkevich, frantic, grabbed his revolver and ran after him. In the dim light of the courtyard lamps, Rasputin staggered across the snow, leaving a trail of blood. Purishkevich fired once, missed, fired again. The shot went wide. On the third try, the bullet struck Rasputin in the back. He stumbled but kept moving. A fourth shot rang out, this time hitting his head. Rasputin collapsed, face first into the snow. Purishkevich approached cautiously, revolver trembling. At close range, he fired again to make certain. At last, Rasputin lay still. The conspirators wrapped Rasputin's body in a heavy cloth and bound it with ropes. They hauled it into an automobile and drove through the silent streets of Petrograd. Their destination, the frozen Neva River. There, hacking through the ice, they forced the corpse into the water. The current carried him beneath the frozen surface, disappearing into darkness. The conspirators breathed sighs of relief. The deed was done. Rasputin would trouble Russia no more, or so they believed. Within hours, the story of Rasputin's impossible death began to spread. Poison that failed, bullets that did not kill, a staggering resurrection, and at last a body dumped into icy waters. Each retelling added drama, mystery, and fear. Later, when Rasputin's corpse was recovered, rumors claimed his lungs contained water, proving he had still been alive when cast into the river. Others insisted the fatal wound was the final bullet to his forehead. Still others believed he had died from the initial shot, but that the conspirators embellished the tale for dramatic effect. Whatever the truth, the legend was born. Rasputin, the man who would not die, had fought death to the very end, defying poison, bullets, and ice alike. For 2 days, Petrograd buzzed with whispers. Rasputin, the ever-present shadow in the imperial court, had vanished. The Tsarina anxiously awaited word from her beloved friend, while his enemies smirked quietly, certain the deed had been accomplished. Then, on December 19th, 1916, January 1st, 1917, in the Western calendar, fishermen on the Neva River spotted a body trapped beneath the ice near the Petrovsky Bridge. Police were summoned, and the corpse was dragged from the freezing water. The body was dressed in Rasputin's familiar black robe and heavy boots. His long hair was matted with ice, his beard stiff with frost. Even before official confirmation, word spread like wildfire. Rasputin was dead. An autopsy was conducted at a military hospital by Professor Dmitri Kosorotov, a forensic expert. His findings, however, have remained clouded in contradiction. Some accounts state that Rasputin's body bore 3 bullet wounds, one to the chest, one to the back, and one to the forehead at close range. Bruises and cuts suggested he had been beaten. Yet the most sensational claim came from reports that his lungs contained water, meaning he had still been alive when cast into the river and had drowned beneath the ice. Other versions dispute this, claiming the lungs showed no trace of water and that death came from the gunshot to the head. The confusion was partly deliberate. Yusupov's later memoirs embellished the story with theatrical detail, presenting Rasputin as a near-immortal demon who refused to die. Purishkevich, in his own account, contradicted Yusupov. Police reports muddled the matter further. Over time, the legend grew larger than the facts. What remains certain is this: Rasputin's body had been shot, beaten, and dumped into the icy Neva. Whether he drowned or was already dead when submerged, his end was violent and gruesome. When Alexandra received news of Rasputin's death, she was devastated. To her, he had been more than a mystic advisor. He was the protector of her son, the divine guardian of her family. She wept uncontrollably and insisted that Rasputin had foreseen his murder. Indeed, only weeks earlier, Rasputin had written a chilling letter to Nicholas and Alexandra. In it, he prophesied, "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will rule for many years to come. But if I am killed by one of your relatives, then none of your family will remain alive more than 2 years." This prophecy now hung over the Romanovs like a curse. Alexandra clung to the belief that Rasputin's death spelled doom for the dynasty. Tsar Nicholas faced a difficult decision. On one hand, Rasputin's death removed a political liability, a source of endless scandal. On the other, the killers included his cousin, Grand Duke Dmitri, and his niece's husband, Felix Yusupov. To punish them severely risked alienating powerful noble families at a time of national crisis. In the end, Nicholas chose exile over execution. Dmitri Pavlovich was sent to the Persian front with the army, a posting that ironically saved his life. He was far from Russia when the revolution came. Felix Yusupov was banished to his estates in the countryside, stripped of influence but otherwise unharmed. The conspirators had expected to be hailed as heroes, saviors of the monarchy. Instead, they were quietly cast aside, their crime uncelebrated by the imperial family. Outside the palace walls, the news spread rapidly. In Petrograd, many ordinary people rejoiced. For years, Rasputin had been the subject of gossip and outrage, the embodiment of corruption. His death seemed like a victory, a sign that the nobility had finally acted. Crowds whispered with excitement, "The mad monk is gone." But relief quickly soured into disillusionment. Killing Rasputin did nothing to solve the bread shortages, the inflation, the war defeats. Within weeks, protests and strikes shook Petrograd. Soldiers mutinied. The February Revolution erupted, sweeping away Nicholas II and ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. Ironically, Rasputin's death removed a convenient scapegoat. With him gone, the failures of the monarchy were laid bare for all to see. In the spring of 1917, the Romanovs were placed under house arrest. The following year, in July 1918, Nicholas II, Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed by Bolshevik forces in Ekaterinburg. To many, Rasputin's prophecy had come true with eerie precision. Killed by nobles, the Romanovs did not survive 2 years beyond his own death. Felix Yusupov, though disgraced, survived the revolution by fleeing abroad. He and Irina eventually settled in Paris, where they lived in relative obscurity, but occasionally basked in their notorious fame. In 1928, Yusupov published his memoirs, dramatizing Rasputin's death and cementing the legend of the mad monk who would not die. Grand Duke Dmitri, exiled and embittered, also survived in Europe, but never returned to Russia. Purishkevich, less fortunate, remained in Russia and briefly supported the White Army before dying of typhus in 1920. The conspirators had hoped to save the monarchy. Instead, they witnessed its collapse and spent the rest of their lives haunted by the futility of their act. In the immediate weeks after Rasputin's death, Alexandra's already shaky reputation deteriorated further. Without Rasputin to advise her, she appeared isolated and paranoid. Ministers distrusted her. The public mocked her grief. The monarchy, instead of being strengthened, seemed more fragile than ever. By removing Rasputin, the conspirators had hoped to cut away a cancer. Instead, they revealed that the empire's illness was far deeper, rooted not in one man, but in the decay of the entire system. The assassination of Grigori Rasputin was more than the violent end of a single man. It was a symbolic act, a desperate attempt by the Russian nobility to reverse the tides of history. In their minds, Rasputin was the embodiment of everything rotten at the heart of the empire: corruption, mysticism, immorality, and weakness. By killing him, they believed they could purify the monarchy, restore dignity to Alexandra, and rebuild public trust in Nicholas II. But instead, his death exposed the monarchy's vulnerability. It revealed that even its closest relatives no longer believed in the Tsar's capacity to rule. In this sense, the murder of Rasputin was not the salvation of the Romanovs, but their death knell. It stripped away the last illusion that the dynasty could reform itself from within. In the short term, the assassination created more problems than it solved. Alexandra, already unpopular, became more isolated. Nicholas was forced into the humiliating position of punishing his own cousin and niece's husband, further straining family ties. The Duma and military commanders, who had long complained about Rasputin's influence, realized that the monarchy itself was beyond repair. If even the nobility resorted to murder to save the throne, then perhaps the throne was no longer worth saving. Within weeks, mass protests, bread riots, and strikes shook Petrograd. The February Revolution toppled Nicholas II, and within a year, the Romanovs were gone forever. Rasputin's final letter to the Tsar and Tsarina, written in December 1916, loomed large after his death. He had warned that if nobles murdered him, the Romanov dynasty would fall within 2 years. When Nicholas abdicated in March 1917, and when the family was executed in July 1918, his prophecy appeared eerily fulfilled. Many saw it as evidence of Rasputin's supernatural foresight. Others argued it was coincidence, the words of a man who sensed the dangerous currents around him. Either way, the prophecy became part of his legend, a chilling reminder of his enduring shadow over Russian history. After the revolution, Rasputin's story spread far beyond Russia. To monarchists in exile, he was the demon who had destroyed the dynasty from within. To revolutionaries, he was the symbol of imperial decadence. To ordinary people, he became a character of fascination, a peasant who rose to power through sheer will, charisma, and mystery. In the West, books, plays, and films sensationalized his story. He was depicted as a hypnotic sorcerer, a lecherous monk, a puppet master controlling the Tsarina. Some depictions painted him as almost superhuman, surviving poisons, bullets, and drowning like a character out of folklore. In popular culture, Rasputin became larger than life. He appears in novels, operas, comic books, even animated films. In 1978, a disco song immortalized him as Russia's greatest love machine. His name became shorthand for dark influence, corruption, and the uncanny ability to endure. Yet behind the myth lies a more complex man. Rasputin was not a sorcerer or a demon. He was a peasant with deep religious conviction, a charismatic healer, and a man of weaknesses: lust, drink, pride. His influence over the Romanovs was real, but often exaggerated. He did not command armies or dictate policy, but he did have the ear of the Tsarina, and through her, the machinery of state. His rise reflects the desperation of a royal family isolated from its people, clinging to faith and miracle when reason and reform might have saved them. His death reflects the desperation of a nobility unable to grasp that the monarchy's problems went far beyond one man. The night of December 16th, 1916, has echoed through history as one of the most dramatic assassinations of the 20th century. It is remembered not only for the violence of the act, but for the myth that grew from it: poisoned cakes, failed bullets, and icy waters. Whether these details are fact or embellishment, the story endures because it speaks to something deeper: the struggle of a nation at its breaking point, the clash between faith and reason, between mysticism and modernity, between privilege and revolution. Rasputin's murder did not save the Romanovs. It did not save Russia. But it gave the world a legend, a story of hubris, fear, and death that still fascinates more than a century later. In the end, Rasputin was both man and myth. He was a healer who may have saved the life of a young boy, and a scandalous figure whose appetites and arrogance scandalized a nation. He was a peasant who rose to sit beside emperors, and a man whose death foretold the fall of an empire. That cold December night on the Moika River stands as the ultimate symbol of imperial Russia: extravagant palaces hiding decay, desperate nobles plotting salvation through murder, and a mystic who defied death until the very end. Rasputin, the man who would not die, achieved in death what he had achieved in life: immortality in memory. His story, woven of fact and legend, continues to remind us of the fragility of power the dangers of superstition, and the mysteries that still linger in the shadows of history.